For 15 years, Mourning Dove had lived as a widow, mourning the cowboy they told her was shot dead on a Texas road. Now that same man stood in the doorway of the trading post, alive and staring back at her, and her entire body went numb. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The desert wind carried memories across the Arizona territory like whispers from the dead. Mourning Dove had learned to ignore them, those phantom voices that spoke of a love she had buried 15 years ago beneath the red rocks of the canyon where they had promised each other forever. At 34, she had rebuilt her life from the ashes of heartbreak, becoming the healer her grandmother had trained her to be, tending to the sick and wounded who found their way to the small trading post where two worlds collided in an uneasy peace. The summer of 1885 had been cruel, bringing drought and fever to the land in equal measure. Mourning Dove worked from dawn until the stars painted the sky, mixing remedies from sage and juniper, cooling fevered brows with cloths soaked in precious water. She had no time for ghosts, no patience for the memories that still ambushed her in quiet moments. Yet they came anyway, unbidden and unwelcome, carrying the face of a man she had loved with the fierce totality of youth, a man whose death had shattered something inside her that had never fully healed. His name had been Elijah Cole, though she had called him by the Apache name she gave him, Walking Thunder, for the way his presence seemed to roll across the landscape like a storm approaching. He had arrived at her father's camp when she was 19, a young cowboy with sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of spring grass, wounded from a confrontation with bandits who had left him for dead in the desert. Her father, a respected elder who believed in the old ways of hospitality, had brought him to their camp, and Mourning Dove had been tasked with nursing him back to health. She had expected to hate him, this white man who represented everything her people had lost. Instead, she found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his willingness to learn their customs, his genuine respect for their ways. He spoke to her not as a curiosity or a conquest, but as an equal, asking questions about her healing arts, listening to her stories with an attention that made her feel seen in ways she had never experienced before. By the time his wounds had healed, something far more dangerous had taken root between them. Their love had been forbidden by both their worlds. Her father, despite his initial kindness, could not accept his daughter binding herself to a white man when their people were being pushed ever further from their ancestral lands. Elijah's family back in Texas had disowned him when they learned of his attachment to an Apache woman, sending letters filled with threats and biblical condemnations. But neither of them had cared. They were young and foolish, and believed that love could conquer the hatred that surrounded them. For 2 golden years, they had carved out a secret existence in the spaces between their worlds. Elijah worked as a ranch hand for a sympathetic cattleman who asked no questions about where he disappeared to every few weeks. Mourning Dove convinced her family that she was gathering herbs in the distant canyons, spending precious days in his arms in a hidden valley they had claimed as their own. They had even talked of marriage, of finding a place far from both their peoples where they could build something lasting together. Then had come the night that ended everything. Mourning Dove remembered it with the clarity of a wound that refused to scar. A rider had come to her father's camp bearing news that Elijah Cole had been killed by a group of men claiming to be Texas Rangers, shot down on the road leading to their meeting place. The rider had described seeing his body, bloody and still, being loaded onto a wagon by men who said they were taking him back to Texas for burial. She had wanted to die herself in those first weeks. The grief had been a living thing, clawing at her insides, stealing her breath, making every sunrise feel like a personal betrayal. Her grandmother had found her one morning, standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking the canyon, and had pulled her back from the edge with hands that were gentle but unyielding. The old woman had spoken words that Mourning Dove still carried with her, words about the duty of the living to honor the dead by continuing to breathe, continuing to heal, continuing to be of service to those who needed them. So Mourning Dove had survived. She had taken her grandmother's teachings and made them her purpose, channeling her grief into the medicines she mixed, the wounds she bound, the fevers she fought. She had refused every offer of marriage, explaining to her father that her heart had been given once and could not be given again. He had eventually stopped asking, accepting that his daughter would walk her own path, even if it was one he did not understand. 15 years had passed since that terrible night. 15 years of watching seasons change, of witnessing births and deaths, of learning to find meaning in the small victories of healing others, even when she could not heal herself. Mourning Dove had made peace with her solitude, or so she told herself. She had stopped dreaming of Elijah, stopped reaching for him in the empty moments before dawn. She had become someone new, someone defined by her purpose, rather than her loss. The trading post where she lived and worked sat at a crossroads of the territory, a ramshackle collection of buildings where settlers, soldiers, natives, and outlaws all mixed in an atmosphere of cautious commerce. Jacob Morrow, the old man who ran the post, had given her a room in exchange for her healing services, recognizing that having a medicine woman on the premises was good for business. People came from miles around when illness struck, and they spent money on supplies while they waited for their loved ones to recover. The afternoon sun was brutal, pouring through the gaps in the wooden walls of the storeroom where Mourning Dove was grinding herbs for a poultice. Sweat dampened the back of her neck, and the turquoise beads of her grandmother's necklace felt heavy against her chest. She was focused on her work, counting the repetitions of the grinding stone, when she heard Jacob's voice from the front of the store, welcoming a customer with his usual gruff hospitality. She paid no attention at first. Strangers came and went constantly, their stories none of her concern unless they came seeking her healing. But something made her pause, some quality in the voice that responded to Jacob's greeting. It was low and rough, damaged by years of hard living. Yet there was something beneath the gravel that triggered a response deep in her memory, a recognition that bypassed her conscious mind entirely. Her hands stilled on the grinding stone. The herbs lay forgotten as she listened, straining to hear more clearly through the thin walls that separated the storeroom from the main trading floor. The voice spoke again, asking about supplies for a long journey, and Mourning Dove felt the world tilt beneath her feet. It was impossible. The dead did not speak, did not walk into trading posts asking about flour and ammunition. Yet her body knew that voice with a certainty that transcended reason, knew it the way it knew the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She rose from her workbench on legs that trembled, her mind racing to find explanations that did not require her to question everything she had believed for 15 years. She moved toward the doorway that connected the storeroom to the main trading floor, her moccasins silent on the packed earth. Through the gap in the curtain that served as a door, she could see Jacob behind his counter, his weathered face creased in conversation. And there, with his back to her, stood a man in the worn clothing of a cowboy, his hat casting shadows across shoulders that seemed somehow familiar, despite the years that had reshaped them. Mourning Dove's hand found the doorframe, gripping it until her knuckles went white. She needed to see his face. She needed to know if the impossible was somehow true, or if grief had finally broken something in her mind that she had spent 15 years trying to hold together. The man was reaching into his pocket, counting out coins for his purchases, and she willed him to turn around to show her the stranger's face that would dispel this madness. But when he turned, it was not a stranger's face at all. The years had changed him. His hair, once the color of wheat in summer, was darker now, streaked with gray at the temples. Deep lines carved paths from the corners of his eyes, and a scar she did not recognize ran along his jawline like a river of hardship. But those eyes, those impossible green eyes that had haunted her dreams for 15 years, looked out from a face that was unmistakably, impossibly, devastatingly his. Elijah Cole was alive. The sound that escaped her was something between a gasp and a cry, loud enough to make both men turn toward the doorway where she stood frozen. Mourning Dove watched as recognition dawned in those green eyes, watched as the color drained from his weathered face, watched as the package of supplies slipped from fingers gone suddenly nerveless. Her hand flew to her mouth, pressing against lips that had forgotten how to form words. Tears she had thought long exhausted sprang to her eyes, blurring the impossible vision before her. This could not be real. This was a fever dream, a hallucination born of the heat and her endless loneliness. The dead did not return, no matter how desperately the living wished for it. But the dead did not age either, and the man standing before her bore every mark of 15 hard years. The dead did not stare back with eyes full of shock and wonder and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. The dead did not take hesitant steps forward, hands outstretched as if reaching for something precious they feared might shatter at the slightest touch. Mourning Dove. His voice cracked on her name, and the sound of it broke through the last of her defenses. The world went gray at the edges, her vision narrowing to a single point of focus, as her body finally rebelled against what her mind refused to accept. She did not remember falling. One moment she was standing in the doorway, the next she was being lowered gently to the ground, strong arms catching her before she could hit the hard-packed earth. She heard Jacob's voice from somewhere far away, calling for water, calling for someone to help. But closer than that, so close she could feel the warmth of breath against her face, was another voice she had thought she would never hear again. "Stay with me, darling. Stay with me. I know this is impossible. I know you must think you are seeing a ghost. But I am real. I am here. I never died. I never left you. Not by choice." Her eyes fluttered open to find his face inches from her own, and she realized she was cradled in his arms, held with a tenderness that awakened memories she had tried so hard to bury. Up close, she could see every change the years had wrought. New scars crossed his skin like a map of suffering. His hands, rough and calloused, trembled as they brushed the hair from her face. But beneath all the damage, beneath all the years, he was still Elijah. Her walking thunder. "They told me you died." The words came out as a whisper, barely audible even to her own ears. "They said Texas Rangers shot you on the road. They said they saw your body." Pain flickered across his features, old and deep and not entirely healed. "I know," he said softly. "I know what they told you. But it was a lie, Mourning Dove. All of it was a lie, designed to separate us forever." She reached up with a hand that shook violently, needing to touch him, needing to confirm that he was solid and real and not some cruel trick of her desperate imagination. Her fingers found his cheek, traced the unfamiliar scar, felt the warmth of living flesh beneath her palm. A sob tore from her throat, 15 years of grief and loneliness and forced acceptance breaking apart like ice in spring. How? The single word contained a universe of questions. How was he alive? How had he survived? How had he found her after all this time? How was she supposed to process the fact that everything she had believed, everything she had built her survival upon, had been constructed on a foundation of lies? Elijah closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as if it were water and he a man dying of thirst. "It is a long story," he said, "and one I will tell you in full. But first, I need you to know something. I need you to understand the one truth that has sustained me through every moment of these 15 years." His eyes opened, meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." Jacob Morrow had seen many strange things in his decades running the trading post, but nothing had prepared him for the scene unfolding on his floor. He brought water and blankets without asking questions, recognizing that whatever was happening between the Apache healer and the weathered cowboy was not his business to understand. When Morning Dove finally found the strength to stand, supported by Elijah's arm around her waist, Jacob simply nodded toward the back room where she kept her medicines and her small living quarters. "Take whatever time you need," he said gruffly. "I will make sure you are not disturbed." Morning Dove led Elijah through the storeroom and into her private space, a small room barely large enough for her narrow bed, her grandmother's chest of healing supplies, and the memories she could not quite bring herself to discard. She was acutely aware of his presence behind her, of the impossibility of his breathing, of the way his shadow fell across the floor as if 15 years had been nothing more than a terrible dream. She turned to face him once they were alone, really looked at him for the first time without the fog of shock clouding her vision. The changes were profound. The young man she had loved had been lean and quick, moving through the world with the careless grace of someone who had not yet learned how much it could hurt. The man before her now was broader, harder, his body shaped by years of labor and struggle. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before, a darkness that spoke of things endured, of prices paid in currency more precious than gold. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice steadier now, though her heart still raced. "Tell me how this is possible." Elijah lowered himself onto the single wooden chair in the corner, moving like a man twice his age, like someone whose bones remembered injuries his mind had tried to forget. For a long moment he was silent, gathering words that seemed inadequate for the task before him. Then he began to speak, and Morning Dove listened as the truth she had been denied for 15 years finally came to light. "It was my family," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. "My father and my brothers. They found out about us, about where I was going when I disappeared from the ranch. They hired men to intercept me on the road to make it look like rangers had killed me in some kind of confrontation, but they did not want me dead. Death would have been too merciful for their tastes. They wanted me to suffer." Morning Dove felt cold despite the heat of the afternoon. "What did they do to you?" "They knocked me unconscious and put me on a ship bound for South America. When I woke up, I was in the hold of a cargo vessel with a dozen other men who had been sold into labor. We ended up in a silver mine in Peru, worked like animals, beaten if we slowed, killed if we tried to escape." His hands clenched on his knees, knuckles white with the memory. "I spent 8 years in that mine before I finally found a way out. 8 years. The words fell between them like stones. Morning Dove tried to imagine it, tried to comprehend what it would mean to spend 8 years in darkness and chains, knowing that somewhere above the sky still held stars, and the wind still carried the scent of sage. The horror of it was beyond her ability to process, yet she forced herself to listen, to bear witness to what he had endured. "How did you escape?" "A cave-in." Elijah's voice was flat, detached, as if he were describing something that had happened to someone else. Half the mine collapsed. "Killed dozens of men, guards, and prisoners alike. I was in a section that held, but the chaos gave me the opportunity I had been waiting for. I made it to the surface, stole a horse, and rode until the animal collapsed beneath me. Then I walked." He paused, his gaze distant, seeing something far beyond the walls of the small room. "It took me almost 2 years to make my way back to the States. I had no money, no papers, no proof of who I was. I worked odd jobs, begged when I had to, stole when there was no other choice. Every step of the way I thought of you. Your face was the only thing that kept me moving when my body wanted to give up." Morning Dove crossed the space between them, kneeling before him, taking his scarred hands in her own. The gesture was instinctive, born of the connection that had survived despite everything that had been done to sever it. She felt him shudder at her touch, saw tears gathering in those green eyes that had once sparkled with mischief and joy. "Why did it take so long to find me?" The question was gentle, carrying no accusation, only a need to understand. When I finally made it back to Texas, I went looking for my family. Elijah's jaw tightened. They were dead. All of them. A fever had swept through 3 years after they sent me away. Some might call it justice. I called it a robbery. I wanted to look them in the eyes and tell them that they had failed, that I had survived, that nothing they had done could kill what I felt for you. He drew a ragged breath. After that, I started searching for you. But your people had moved, scattered by the pressures that have been destroying Apache lands for decades. Every trail went cold. Every lead turned to nothing. I spent 5 years chasing rumors and ghosts, never knowing if you were alive or dead, never knowing if you had married another man, built a life without me. His hands tightened on hers. Then 3 months ago, I heard a trader mention a medicine woman at Morrow's Post, an Apache healer who wore turquoise beads and had eyes like the night sky. He said she had never married, that she claimed her heart belonged to a dead man. And I knew it had to be you. Morning Dove listened to his words wash over her like rain after a long drought, each revelation both healing and wounding in equal measure. The young woman who had stood on that cliff 15 years ago, ready to follow her love into death, stirred somewhere deep inside her. But she was no longer that girl. The years had changed her too, shaped her into someone who had learned to survive without hope, to find purpose in service rather than love. She did not know if she could simply step back into the life they had imagined together, no matter how desperately part of her wanted to try. She released his hands and rose, moving to the small window that looked out over the dusty landscape behind the trading post. The familiar view grounded her, reminded her of who she had become in his absence. The healer, the woman who had turned her grief into medicine, the survivor who had built something meaningful from the wreckage of her shattered dreams. "I mourned you," she said quietly, her back still turned to him. "I stood at the edge of a canyon and considered joining you in death. My grandmother pulled me back, told me I had a duty to the living. So I buried my heart with the memory of you and learned to exist without it." She heard him rise from the chair, heard his footsteps approaching, felt the warmth of his presence behind her, though he did not touch her. "I am so sorry." His voice was rough with emotion. "If I could have found a way to get word to you to let you know I was alive, I would have moved mountains to do it. But I was a prisoner, Morning Dove, a slave in everything but name. They took everything from me, even the ability to tell you the truth." She turned to face him, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. "It was not your fault. I know that. But knowing something in your mind and accepting it in your heart are different things. For 15 years, I have lived as a widow. I have defined myself by your death. Now you stand before me alive, and I do not know who I am supposed to be." Elijah reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching, as if asking permission. "You are who you have always been, the woman I fell in love with. The woman who saw past the color of my skin to the man beneath. The woman whose courage and kindness changed everything I thought I knew about the world." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. That woman was young and foolish. She believed love could conquer everything. She did not understand that the world would rather destroy something beautiful than allow it to exist. His hand finally made contact, cupping her face with a gentleness that belied the strength in his calloused fingers. Maybe she was right. Maybe it just took the world longer than we expected to stop trying. Morning Dove closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. The connection between them was still there, that inexplicable bond that had defied reason and propriety from the very beginning. She could feel it humming beneath her skin, awakening parts of herself she had thought permanently dormant. But she was also aware of everything that stood between them, The years of separation, the trauma he had endured, the life she had built in his absence. "There are things you do not know," she said, opening her eyes to meet his. "Things that happened while you were gone." His expression flickered with something that might have been fear. "Tell me." She stepped back, needing distance to speak the words she had never expected to say to him. "After they told me you were dead, I discovered I was carrying your child." The silence that followed was absolute. Mourning Dove watched as Elijah processed her words, watched as understanding dawned and transformed his features from confusion to shock to a desperate, hungry hope. "A child?" His voice was barely a whisper. "We have a child?" The words pierced her like arrows, carrying with them the weight of all the grief she had stored away in the deepest chambers of her heart. "Had," she said softly. "We had a child, a daughter. I named her Eliana after you." She watched his hope crumble, watched the light in his eyes extinguish as he understood the meaning behind her use of the past tense. "No," he breathed. "No, please." "She was born early," Mourning Dove continued, her voice steady despite the tears flowing freely now. "Too early. My grandmother did everything she could, used every medicine she knew, but Eliana was not strong enough to survive in this world. She lived for 3 days. 3 beautiful, terrible days. And then she left to join her father, or so I believed." Elijah crumpled. There was no other word for it. The man who had survived 8 years of slavery, 2 years of desperate travel, and 5 years of searching simply collapsed in on himself, falling to his knees as sobs tore from his chest. Mourning Dove knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his shaking form, holding him as he grieved for a daughter he had never known existed. They stayed that way as the afternoon light shifted, 2 broken people clinging to each other amid the wreckage of everything they had lost. Outside, the trading post continued its daily business, unaware that behind the thin walls, a universe was being rebuilt from ruins. Jacob turned away customers seeking the healer, telling them to come back tomorrow, understanding without being told that some wounds required privacy to begin their mending. When Elijah finally raised his head, his face was ravaged, but his eyes held something new. "Tell me about her," he said. "Tell me everything. What she looked like, what she sounded like, everything you remember." Mourning Dove took a shaky breath and began to speak, sharing for the first time the memories she had guarded so jealously for 15 years. She described their daughter's tiny fingers, her dark hair that had already shown hints of curl, her eyes that had not yet decided between green and brown. She spoke of the 3 days of watching and hoping and praying, of the final hours when she had held Eliana against her chest and felt the small heartbeat slowly fade. And when she was finished, they wept together for everything they had lost. The sun had long since set when they finally emerged from the small room, faces bearing the marks of shared grief, but bodies somehow lighter for having borne it together. Jacob had left food outside the door, a simple meal of bread and dried meat that spoke of his gruff kindness. Mourning Dove realized she had not eaten since morning, and her body's demands finally overcame her emotional exhaustion. They ate in silence, sitting side by side on her narrow bed, shoulders touching in a contact that felt both achingly familiar and startlingly new. "Where have you been staying?" Mourning Dove asked when the food was gone, practical concerns finally asserting themselves through the haze of revelation. "Nowhere in particular." Elijah shrugged, the gesture revealing just how rootless his existence had become. "I have been moving from town to town, following rumors of you, sleeping in barns when I could find them, under the stars when I could not." The image of him wandering the territory alone, searching for a woman he was not even certain still lived, twisted something in her chest. "You will stay here tonight. I will speak with Jacob in the morning. He has an extra room he sometimes rents to travelers. I do not want to cause trouble for you." His voice carried an edge of concern. A woman alone, letting a man stay nearby. People will talk. People have been talking about me for 15 years. Morning Dove's tone was dry, carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who had long since stopped caring about whispers. The strange Apache healer who refuses to marry, who speaks to spirits and brews potions. One more rumor will make little difference. Elijah studied her face in the lamplight, and she saw him taking in the changes the years had wrought. She knew she was not the girl he remembered. Her face had grown leaner, more angular, shaped by years of hard work and harder grief. Silver threaded through her dark hair now, catching the light like stars scattered through the night sky. The softness of youth had been replaced by something fiercer, more guarded. "You are different," he said softly, "stronger, more certain of yourself. Suffering will do that." She met his gaze without flinching. "When everything you love is taken from you, you learn what you are truly made of. I discovered I was made of harder stuff than I knew." He nodded slowly, understanding written in every line of his weathered face. "I discovered the same thing in that mine. There were days I wanted to give up, to let them work me to death and be done with it. But every time I came close to surrendering, I saw your face. I heard your voice telling me to keep fighting." Morning Dove felt the familiar ache of love stirring beneath the scar tissue she had built around her heart. It was terrifying, this awakening of feelings she had thought safely dead. She had survived his loss once by convincing herself that the love they had shared was a chapter closed, a story ended. Now the book was being opened again, and she was not sure she had the courage to read what came next. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing everything she could not quite put into words. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands where they rested on his knees. "I have thought about nothing else for years," he admitted. "Finding you, seeing you again, explaining what happened. But I never let myself think beyond that moment. It seemed like tempting fate to imagine you might actually forgive me for disappearing. There is nothing to forgive. You did not choose to leave. Maybe not, but I chose to love you in the first place, knowing the danger it posed. I chose to believe we could outrun the hatred of both our worlds. If I had been stronger, smarter, more careful, perhaps none of this would have happened." Morning Dove reached out and took his hand, feeling the roughness of scars and calluses against her palm. "We were both young," she said. "We both believed in things that the world was determined to prove impossible. But I cannot bring myself to regret loving you, even knowing how much pain it would bring. Those 2 years we had together were the most alive I have ever felt." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles with a reverence that made her breath catch. "Then let me stay," he murmured against her skin. "Not forever, not in any way that compromises your reputation or your work. Just let me be near you while we figure out what comes next. I have spent 15 years in darkness. I am not ready to walk away from the light." The vulnerability in his voice undid something inside her, some final barrier she had erected against the possibility of hope. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of dust and sage and something uniquely him that had survived all the years of separation. "Stay," she whispered. "We will face whatever comes together." They remained that way as the lamp burned low, two survivors clinging to each other in the aftermath of catastrophe. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the trading post like a blanket, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the lonely sound echoing across the empty landscape. Morning Dove knew that their reunion would not go unnoticed. Word would spread, as it always did in this territory where secrets were impossible to keep. There would be questions and judgment and perhaps even danger from those who could not accept a love that crossed the boundaries their world held sacred. But for now, In this moment, none of that mattered. Elijah was alive. After 15 years of grief and loneliness, the man she had loved was sitting beside her, solid and real and scarred but unbroken. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight she would allow herself to feel something she had thought lost forever. Tonight she would allow herself to hope. Morning came with the harsh brightness of the desert sun and the reality that their private world could not remain private for long. Morning Dove woke to find herself alone, a moment of panic seizing her chest before she heard movement in the storeroom beyond her door. She rose quickly, smoothing her hair and straightening her dress, then stepped through the curtain to find Elijah helping Jacob arrange a new shipment of supplies. The old trader glanced at her with knowing eyes but said nothing about the previous night's events. "Got a delivery from Tucson," he said gruffly. "Your man here offered to help unload since I cannot manage the heavy crates like I used to." Morning Dove felt heat rise to her cheeks at the casual reference to Elijah as her man, but she did not correct him. Instead, she moved to begin her morning routine, checking her supplies of dried herbs and mixing a fresh batch of the fever remedy that had been in such demand lately. The familiar work steadied her hands and calmed her racing thoughts. As the morning progressed, the trading post began to fill with its usual assortment of customers. A rancher's wife came seeking medicine for her colicky baby. A traveling preacher stopped to purchase supplies before continuing his circuit through the scattered settlements. 2 soldiers from the nearby fort wandered in, their eyes lingering on Morning Dove with the dismissive curiosity that white men often showed toward native women. But it was the 4th visitor of the morning who brought the first hint of trouble. Morning Dove recognized him immediately, a wiry man named Samuel Hicks, who worked as a scout for the territorial marshal. He had been to the trading post before, always watching, always listening, gathering information that he sold to whoever would pay the highest price. Hicks's eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, cataloging faces and goods with the speed of a man who made his living noticing things others missed. When his gaze landed on Elijah, something flickered in his expression, a spark of recognition that made Morning Dove's blood run cold. "Well now," Hicks drawled, his thin lips curving into a smile that held no warmth. "Elijah Cole, I heard you were dead, boy. Shot down by rangers somewhere out Texas way." Elijah straightened from the crate he had been unpacking, his body tensing with the wariness of a man who had learned to expect danger from every direction. "You heard wrong," he said carefully. "As you can see, I am very much alive." Hicks ambled closer, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "Funny thing about rumors. Sometimes they start for a reason. Your family put out quite a bit of money spreading the word of your death. Made sure everyone from here to California believed it. My family is dead. So I heard." Hicks picked up a tin of tobacco from a nearby shelf, examining it with exaggerated interest. "Fever, they say. Took the whole clan inside of a week. Some folks called it divine justice, given how they made their fortune." Morning Dove moved to stand beside Elijah, her presence a silent declaration of solidarity. "What do you want, Hicks?" The scout's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Just making conversation, ma'am. Cannot a man express surprise at seeing a ghost walk among the living?" He set down the tobacco tin and fixed Elijah with a calculating stare. "Though I wonder what certain parties might pay to learn that Elijah Cole has risen from the grave. The Coles had enemies, you know. Men who might be interested to learn their bloodline did not die out after all." The threat was barely veiled, and Morning Dove felt Elijah's arm brush against hers as he stepped forward. "Whatever you're thinking, forget it. I have nothing anyone would want. No money, no land, no connections. I am just a man trying to live out whatever years I have left in peace. Peace is expensive in this territory," Hicks replied. He tipped his hat to Morning Dove with mocking courtesy. "Ma'am." Then he turned and sauntered out of the trading post, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unspoken danger. Jacob waited until the scout's horse could be heard riding away before speaking. "That one is trouble," he said grimly. "He will sell information to anyone with coin, and there are plenty of folks who would pay well to know a Cole survived." "Who would care?" Morning Dove asked, her healer's mind already racing through possibilities and contingencies. "His family is gone. What threat could he pose to anyone now?" The Cole family had their hands in many dark dealings. Jacob's voice was low, meant only for them. Mining claims, cattle rustling, even some say they had connections to men who traded in human cargo. Elijah being alive might stir up questions about business arrangements that certain powerful people would prefer, stayed buried. Morning Dove looked at Elijah, seeing the weight of his family's sins settling onto shoulders already burdened with years of suffering. He had escaped their cruelty only to find himself endangered by their legacy, haunted by crimes he had never committed and debts he had never incurred. "We should leave," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "Both of us. Before Hicks can spread word of your presence." Elijah shook his head slowly. "Running did not save me before. My family found me despite every precaution I took. If there are people who want me dead because of what my kin did, they will find me eventually regardless of where I go. Then we stand and face them." Morning Dove's voice carried the steel that 15 years of survival had forged into her spirit. Together, he looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You would do that? Risk everything you have built here for a man who has brought nothing but trouble into your life?" She met his gaze without wavering. "You are not trouble, Elijah. You are the only dream I ever had that mattered. I lost you once because I was not there to fight beside you. I will not make that mistake again." The days that followed were marked by a strange mixture of rekindled intimacy and watchful tension. Morning Dove continued her healing work while Elijah made himself useful around the trading post, his skills with horses and repairs quickly earning Jacob's grudging approval. They fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and fragile, like a newly mended bone that had not yet fully healed. At night they talked for hours, filling in the vast gaps that 15 years had carved between them. Elijah spoke of the mine, of the darkness that had become his world, of the men he had watched die beside him, and the ones who had become unlikely friends in that underground hell. He told her about Manuel, a Mexican farmer who had been sold into bondage for failing to pay a debt, and how the older man had taught him to survive when everything in him wanted to give up. Morning Dove shared her own stories in return, though they seemed smaller somehow against the magnitude of his suffering. She described the years of learning her grandmother's medicine, of slowly earning the trust of a community that had every reason to distrust anyone with native blood. She spoke of patients she had saved and those she had lost, of the way healing others had become her way of healing herself. They did not speak of the future. By unspoken agreement, they lived in the present, savoring each moment together while avoiding the questions that loomed on the horizon. Where would they go? What kind of life could they build? Was there any place in this world that would accept what they were to each other? On the 5th day after Elijah's arrival, a rider came from the east bearing news that shattered their fragile peace. Samuel Hicks had been found dead on the road to Tucson, his throat cut and his saddlebags emptied. The territorial marshal was treating it as a robbery, but Jacob had darker suspicions. Someone did not want him talking, the old trader said grimly, which means someone already knows what he knew. Morning Dove felt ice form in her stomach. Hicks had been killed because of what he had learned at the trading post. Whoever had silenced him now possessed the information he had been planning to sell, the knowledge that Elijah Cole was alive and could be found at Morrow's post. "We need to prepare," she said, her mind already cataloging weapons, supplies, defensible positions. "If they are coming for him, they will come here." Elijah's expression was troubled. "I should leave. Draw them away from you from this place. You have built something here, Morning Dove. I will not let my presence destroy it. She rounded on him with fury that surprised them both. Do not you dare talk about leaving me again, even to protect me. I spent 15 years believing you were dead. I will not spend another day wondering if you are alive or dead somewhere beyond my reach. The intensity of her words seemed to stun him into silence. She pressed her advantage, stepping close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Whatever is coming, we face it together. That is not negotiable, Elijah. If you try to run, I will follow you. If you try to send me away, I will refuse. We have been given a second chance that neither of us expected. I will not waste it on fear. He studied her face for a long moment, and she watched the conflict play out behind his eyes. Finally, something in him seemed to surrender. Together then, he said quietly, whatever comes. The preparation began immediately. Jacob, despite his age and the risk to his livelihood, refused to abandon them. This post has been my home for 30 years, he declared. I am not about to let some hired killers chase me off my own land. They fortified the trading post as best they could, boarding up windows and creating defensive positions that would give them clear lines of fire. Elijah taught Morning Dove how to handle the rifle Jacob kept behind his counter, her natural steadiness making her a quick study. They stockpiled water and food, preparing for a siege that might last days or end in minutes. The waiting was the hardest part. 3 days passed with no sign of trouble, each sunrise bringing both relief and renewed tension. Customers came and went, unaware of the danger that lurked somewhere beyond the horizon. Morning Dove treated a snakebite, set a broken finger, and mixed remedies for a half-dozen common ailments, all while keeping one eye on the road that led east. On the 4th night, she and Elijah sat together on the roof of the trading post, watching stars wheel overhead in the vast desert sky. The beauty of it ached in her chest, this reminder of how precious life was, how quickly it could be taken away. I used to look at these same stars from the mine, Elijah said softly. There was a shaft that opened to the sky, too steep to climb, but at night I could see a small patch of darkness filled with light. I would imagine you looking up at the same stars, somewhere far away, and it made me feel less alone. Morning Dove leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I looked at the stars every night and prayed for your spirit. I asked my ancestors to watch over you in the land of the dead. She paused, a sad smile touching her lips. Perhaps they heard me after all, just not in the way I expected. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Your ancestors kept me alive, he murmured into her hair. Your love kept me alive. Even when I did not know if you still existed, the memory of what we had was enough to keep me fighting. In the distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry echoing across the desert. Morning Dove closed her eyes and allowed herself to simply exist in this moment, pressed against the man she loved, surrounded by the infinite beauty of the night sky. Tomorrow might bring violence and death, but tonight, for this brief span of hours, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. They came on the 7th day, riding out of the east with the rising sun at their backs. Morning Dove spotted them first, her eyes trained by years of watching the horizon for approaching patients and potential threats. 6 riders moving in formation, their purpose unmistakable in the way they spread out to cover escape routes before they were even within rifle range. She rang the bell that Jacob had rigged as a warning signal, its clear tone cutting through the morning stillness. Within moments, Elijah was at her side, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowing as he studied the approaching figures. Do you recognize any of them? He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tightening. The one in front. That is Thomas Mercer. He worked for my father, handled the kind of business the family did not want traced back to them, the kind involving people who disappeared and were never seen again. Morning Dove felt the weight of her own rifle in her hands, the unfamiliar heft of it a reminder of how far she had come from the girl who had once believed love could conquer all. She had learned to mix medicines and set bones, to ease suffering and coax life back into failing bodies. Now she was preparing to take life, to become something her grandmother would barely recognize. Jacob took his position at the back window, covering the approach from the north. "I count 6, he called out. "Well armed. Professional." "They are not here to negotiate," Elijah replied grimly. "Mercer never left witnesses." The riders stopped 100 yards from the trading post, their horses stamping and snorting in the morning heat. Thomas Mercer dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced consequences for his actions. He was tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the light, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. "Elijah Cole," Mercer called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I have to admit I did not believe it when I heard. The Cole family ghost, risen from the dead. Your father would be disappointed to know his money was wasted." Elijah stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle ready but not raised. "What do you want, Mercer?" The older man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Loose ends, boy. Your family left quite a mess when they died. Business arrangements that certain important people would prefer stayed buried. You being alive raises questions. Questions that make powerful men nervous. I know nothing about my family's dealings. I was sold into slavery before I could learn any of their secrets." "Maybe so." Mercer shrugged as if the distinction was irrelevant. "But dead men tell no tales, as they say. And there are people willing to pay very well to ensure the Cole bloodline is truly extinct." Morning Dove moved to stand beside Elijah, her presence drawing Mercer's attention. His eyes swept over her with the dismissive assessment of a man who viewed women as objects rather than people. "And who is this? The savage healer I have heard about?" He laughed, a cold sound without humor. "They said you had a weakness for native women, Cole. Seems some things do not change even after 15 years in a mine." The insult burned through Morning Dove like fire, but she kept her face impassive. She had endured worse from men like Mercer, had learned to transform their contempt into fuel for her own determination. Let him underestimate her. Let him see only a woman, only a native, only something beneath his notice. It might be the last mistake he ever made. "Ride away," Elijah said, his voice carrying a warning that even Mercer should have heeded. "There is nothing for you here. Whatever secrets my family kept died with them." Mercer's smile faded. "That is not how this works, boy. You do not get to decide when it is over." He gestured to his men, who began spreading out further, surrounding the trading post like wolves circling wounded prey. "You can make this easy or hard. Come out, let us finish our business, and we will leave the woman and the old man alone. Make us come in after you, and everyone dies." Morning Dove's finger tightened on her rifle trigger. She knew men like Mercer, had seen their kind ride through Apache camps, making promises they never intended to keep. Whatever happened here today, he would leave no witnesses. His offer was nothing but a predator's patience, waiting for prey to make a fatal mistake. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. She felt Elijah's surprise, felt Jacob's attention shift from the back window. "You will not ride away regardless of what we do, so we will make you earn whatever you came here to take." Mercer's eyes narrowed, reassessing her with something that might have been grudging respect. "The savage has teeth," he observed. "Very well. Hard way it is." He raised his hand, and the world exploded into violence. The first shot came from one of Mercer's men, aimed at Elijah but striking the porch rail inches from his chest. Morning Dove returned fire without thinking. her bullet catching the shooter in the shoulder and spinning him from his horse. Then they were inside, the door barred behind them, as gunfire erupted from all directions. Glass shattered, wood splintered, the air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Morning Dove moved through the chaos with a clarity she had not known she possessed, reloading her rifle with hands that barely trembled, firing at shadows that moved past the boarded windows. Beside her, Elijah was a revelation. The gentleman who read poetry and spoke of stars had been replaced by the soldier he had once been, his movements economical and deadly, each shot finding its target with precision born of training she had never witnessed. Jacob's voice rang out from the back. Two coming around the north side. Morning Dove spun, rifle raised, and squeezed the trigger. The man coming around the north corner fell before he could raise his weapon, Morning Dove's shot catching him square in the chest. She did not allow herself to think about what she had done, about the life she had just ended. There would be time for that later, for the guilt and the prayers and the cleansing rituals her grandmother had taught her. Now there was only survival, only the desperate need to protect the people she loved. The gunfight seemed to last hours, though later she would realize it had been mere minutes. Mercer's men were professionals, but they had expected easy prey. A broken man and his native woman, not armed defenders willing to die for each other. Two more of them fell before the others pulled back, regrouping beyond rifle range to reassess their strategy. In the sudden silence, Morning Dove took stock of their situation. Jacob had taken a bullet to the arm, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage he had tied with his teeth in one hand. Elijah was unhurt but breathing hard, his eyes scanning the windows for any sign of renewed attack. The trading post itself had been transformed into a wreck, supplies scattered, walls pocked with bullet holes, the careful order of her healing space destroyed. "How many left?" she asked, moving to Jacob's side to examine his wound. 3, maybe 4. Elijah's voice was grim. "Mercer is still out there. He will not give up easily." The old trader winced as Morning Dove tightened his bandage. "Bullet went clean through," she told him. "You will live if we survive the next hour." "Comforting," Jacob muttered, but there was dark humor in his eyes. Movement outside drew their attention. Mercer's voice rang out across the dusty yard, carrying a new edge of anger. "You killed my men, Cole. That changes things. I was going to make it quick, but now I think I will take my time." Morning Dove peered through a gap in the boards, trying to locate the source of his voice. She could see 2 of the remaining men taking cover behind the water trough, another crouched near the corner of the barn. Mercer himself was nowhere visible, which worried her more than if she could see him clearly. "He is flanking us," she said quietly, "coming around while his men keep us pinned." Elijah nodded, his expression calculating. "I need to draw him out, end this before he gets inside." "No." Morning Dove grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. "You are not sacrificing yourself. We find another way. There is no other way." He met her eyes, and she saw the resignation there, the willingness to die if it meant she would live. "I will not let him hurt you, Morning Dove. Not after everything we have survived to find each other again." The words cut through her like a blade, carrying echoes of the night 15 years ago when she had learned of his supposed death. She had survived that loss, barely, had rebuilt herself from the ruins of her grief. She would not survive it again. "Then we go together," she said fiercely. "Both of us or neither." Before he could argue, a new sound reached her ears, distant at first but growing rapidly closer. Hoofbeats, many of them, approaching from the west. Mercer's men heard it too, their attention shifting from the trading post to the horizon where a cloud of dust was rising against the morning sky. "Riders," Jacob called from his position. "At least a dozen, maybe more." Morning Dove's heart clenched with renewed fear. Reinforcements for Mercer would mean their deaths, swift and certain. But as the riders drew closer, she began to make out details that did not match that assumption. The horses were painted, decorated in styles she recognized. The riders carried weapons, but also feathers and symbols that spoke of her people, of the Apache bands that still roamed these territories despite everything the white world had done to drive them out. At their head rode a figure she knew, a man she had not seen in years but whose face was burned into her memory. Her brother, Runs Like Wind, who had disappeared into the mountains after their father's death, leading a small group of warriors who refused to surrender to reservation life. The effect on Mercer's men was immediate. Caught between the fortified trading post and a war party of Apache warriors, they made the only sensible choice. Two of them broke for their horses, spurring the animals into desperate flight toward the east. The third, the one behind the barn, emerged with his hands raised in surrender. Only Mercer remained, stepping out from the shadows of the stable with his pistol raised. His face was twisted with fury, the composed mask of professionalism stripped away to reveal the killer beneath. "This is not over, Cole," he snarled. "You think some savages will save you? I will come back with an army. I will burn this whole territory to the ground before I let you live." He raised his pistol, aiming at Elijah, and Mourning Dove acted without thought. She stepped in front of the man she loved, placing her body between him and the bullet, her rifle coming up in the same motion. They fired simultaneously. Mourning Dove felt the impact like a punch to her shoulder, spinning her sideways even as her own shot found its mark. Mercer staggered, a red bloom spreading across his chest, his pistol falling from nerveless fingers. He looked down at the wound with an expression of almost comical surprise, as if he could not quite believe that his story was ending this way. Then he crumpled to the dust, and the threat that had loomed over them was finally, irrevocably ended. Mourning Dove was aware of Elijah's arms catching her, of his voice calling her name with desperate urgency. The pain in her shoulder was distant, muffled by shock and the strange clarity that comes with survival. She looked up at his face, saw the fear and love written there in equal measure, and managed a weak smile. "I told you," she whispered. "Together." Then the world went gray, and she surrendered to the darkness that had been waiting at the edges of her vision. Mourning Dove drifted in a sea of darkness, aware of voices and movement around her, but unable to surface into full consciousness. She heard Elijah's voice, tight with fear, directing someone to bring water and clean cloth. She heard her brother speaking in the Apache tongue, words she had not heard in years, prayers for healing that their grandmother had taught them both as children. She felt hands on her shoulder, gentle but insistent, and the burning sensation of medicine being applied to torn flesh. Time lost all meaning in that twilight space between life and death. She dreamed of her daughter, Eliana, the tiny face she had memorized in those 3 precious days. In the dream, the baby smiled at her, reaching out with impossibly small fingers, and Mourning Dove understood that her child was telling her it was not yet time, that there was still living to be done. She woke to lamplight and the familiar smell of sage burning somewhere nearby. The ceiling above her was the one she knew, the rough wooden beams of her room at the trading post. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, but the pain was manageable, the kind that spoke of healing rather than dying. Elijah was beside her, slumped in a chair that had been pulled close to her bed, his hand wrapped around hers even in sleep. The lines of worry on his face had deepened, and she realized with a start that his hair seemed grayer than it had been just days ago. How long had she been unconscious? How many hours had he spent watching over her, waiting to learn if she would live or die? She squeezed his hand weakly, and his eyes flew open instantly, alert despite the exhaustion that shadowed his features. When he saw her looking at him, saw the awareness in her gaze, something broke open in his expression, a dam of fear releasing into overwhelming relief. "You came back to me," he breathed, lifting her hand to press it against his cheek. She felt moisture there, tears he had not bothered to hide. "I thought I had lost you again. I thought the world was cruel enough to give you back only to take you away." Morning Dove managed a small smile, though the effort cost her. "It will take more than one bullet to separate us now," she whispered. "We have too much time to make up for." The door opened quietly, and Runs Like Wind entered, his weathered face softening when he saw his sister awake. He spoke in their native tongue, words of relief and gentle teasing about her stubbornness, about how she had always been too determined to die when there was still work to be done. "How did you know?" Morning Dove asked him. "How did you find us?" Her brother settled onto the edge of the bed, his presence a comfort she had not realized she needed. "Word travels among our people," he said. "When I heard that my sister had reunited with the white man she loved, the one we all believed dead, I knew trouble would follow. Some loves are too bright for this dark world. They attract those who would snuff them out." She looked between the two men, her brother and her love, representatives of two worlds that had spent generations trying to destroy each other. Yet here they were, united in their concern for her, bound by something stronger than the hatred their peoples had been taught. The days of her recovery were slow but steady. Morning Dove's skills as a healer served her well as a patient, and she directed Elijah in the preparation of poultices and remedies that accelerated her body's natural repair. Jacob's arm healed cleanly, and the old trader resumed his work with a new story to tell customers, one that grew more dramatic with each retelling. Runs Like Wind stayed for 2 weeks, his warriors helping to repair the damage the gunfight had caused. In the evenings, he and Elijah sat together on the porch, communicating in a mixture of broken English, hand signs, and the few Apache words Elijah had learned during his time with Morning Dove years ago. She watched them from her bed by the window, marveling at the unlikely friendship forming between them. When her brother finally departed, leading his warriors back into the mountains that had become their refuge, he left behind a gift. A small pouch of sacred earth from the place where their grandmother was buried, meant to bless whatever home Morning Dove chose to build. "You have my blessing, sister," he told her as they said goodbye. "This man has proven himself. He walked through fire to return to you. That is worth more than the color of his skin." As autumn painted the desert in shades of gold and amber, Morning Dove stood beside Elijah in front of the trading post, watching the sun set over the land that had become their home. Her shoulders still ached when the weather changed, a reminder of the price they had paid for their second chance. But she wore the scar with pride, a testament to what she had been willing to sacrifice for love. "Jacob has offered to sell us the trading post when he retires," Elijah said quietly, his arm wrapped around her waist. "Says he cannot think of better people to carry on his legacy." Morning Dove leaned into his warmth, considering the future that stretched before them. A home of their own, a place where she could continue her healing work, a life built on the foundation of everything they had survived. "What do you think?" he asked. She turned to face him, reaching up to trace the familiar lines of his weathered face. "I think we have spent 15 years learning how to survive apart. Perhaps it is time we learned how to live together." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, a promise sealed without words. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their love from the beginning, that had kept them connected across years and miles of separation. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and the distant cry of a hawk. Morning Dove closed her eyes and let herself simply exist in this moment, held by the man she had loved across impossible distances, standing on the threshold of a future she had never dared to imagine. They had told her he was dead. They had been wrong, and now, at last, their story could truly begin. Thank you for reading. If this story touched you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've got something extra special waiting for you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from.